Hello, welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, Scale. Honored to have Eric Fischgrund here, CEO, founder of Fischgrund PR. Been on equity crowdfunding panels with Eric. Impressed by the wealth of knowledge and case studies. Thanks for being on the show today, Eric.
Thank you. And it's FischTank PR. Although Fischgrund PR has a nice ring to it too. And by the way, I get that all the time, and sometimes I signed Eric FischTank, and it happens all the time. So,
with my last name of Fishman, you think I would have got that right there?
Yes. I'm surprised I haven't made that connection yet, and made reference to it. But thank you so much for having me on, and thanks obviously for your patience in getting me set up here.
Absolutely. And one of the things that stood out in our conversations, both at conferences, and discussions leading up to this, is best practices. You really go about PR the right way, and results show that in this growing industry of investor acquisition, equity crowdfunding, fintech, tech as a whole. So very interested to learn more about your history and everything you've done to get here today.
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks again. I'll give you a quick overview. I founded FischTank PR in late 2013. My partner and now president of the firm, Matt Bretzius, joined in mid-2014, and since then we've been able to grow organically, which of course typically means word of mouth and referrals, and obviously opportunities to come chat with people like you and get a little bit of quality exposure. FischTank provides, as I said, it's FischTank PR, so public relations services, right? But what does that mean? I would say the biggest component of what we do is media relations. We also do a lot of content writing, as we're probably going to discuss today. The role of content, as well as, and how it interacts, I should say, with online search and public relations as a whole is very important. We also handle some social media strategies for our clients, although typically on the organic, the publishing side. So not much advertising. In terms of industries that we work in, I would say tech and science are certainly an underlying driver for almost everything we do. So we have a very prominent healthcare practice, a prominent sustainability, that's clean tech, ag tech, renewable energy practice, and then our business and marketing technologies practice as well. And then we do plenty in the financial services, real estate, professional services space. So very corporate in nature. If you're looking for a firm to promote, a restaurant or a product line, or new shoes, or a celebrity, or anything that's like sexy and attractive, you should talk to somebody else. If you want to talk about photovoltaic technology, or hydrogen fuel cells, or artificial intelligence in precision medicine, then we're the folks to talk to. Fortunately, it's a lot of companies like that are out raising capital right now, and we're fortunate that they're hiring FischTank to manage their corporate communications process and achieve media exposure for them. My personal background, just I guess prior to starting FischTank, definitely multifaceted in terms of communications. I was at an agency, PR agency, for 4 years. Then worked in-house for a non-traded REIT and its affiliated broker-dealer. It was only a 2-year stint, but it was probably the most influential career position or career role that I had, and the exposure to entrepreneurs and people that were, seeing around corners and cutting corners, and, taste of the real world. I, joked that it was, I was paid to go through business school when I was at that role. So I started FischTank shortly after, and 7 years later, here I am. One of the big things I want to talk about today, I'd started to touch on media relations, but the thing I am passionate also, in chatting about is not just like, how do I get media exposure, or even why do I want media exposure, right? Because objectives do matter, but just how does it actually work, right? Like how does a company's story turn into engagement between a journalist and a public relations practitioner like myself, or a company, whether they handle it in-house or grab an agency like ours. How does that engagement occur? And then, how do you move it along, move the discussion along, and ultimately achieve media coverage, meaningful media coverage? One of the reasons I want to discuss that is just because I see a lot of folks coming into the space, and it's not just exclusive to equity crowdfunding or fintech or cannabis or healthcare or anything, but they expect, my company exists. I have a website and a CEO. Wall Street Journal should, feature me. And it's starting to feel like people's perception of media is that it's purely transactional. And it's not. So yeah, I tried condensing that a little bit.
That was perfect. And I love how you said, you are working in categories that aren't sexy. If it looks good, if it's fashion, it's not you guys. May just be the tech enthusiast in me, but all the emerging verticals you were touching on get me more excited. It sounds like you're constantly working on things that are new, things that are different, things that are getting more attention. And love how you started with the real estate background there and working with REITs, getting an idea of the full target audience mindset and who publishers, who issuers, who brands are trying to reach throughout the process. Sounds like you're really able to tap into it at those times and then evolve it into the PR agency here. And that's been reflected in the results you guys are producing. And when you talk about media relations, what are the typical client questions? I should say prospective client questions. You're working with a new group, speaking to a new group, and they say, hey, we want to be featured by these publishers. Are they providing some type of wish list? Are they just saying we want to get covered tomorrow? As I know you're pointing out, some of the falsities or perceptions from issuers who have not gone through this type of program before, or are they looking more long term? Are they talking more about how is this done? How long does it take to craft our storyline and overall pitch process? What are some of the questions you get in the early stages, and what's the right way for the audience to really gear their thought processes towards the right way to go about it?
Sure. So the early questions that I feel like we get fairly often are, really starting at the top. How soon before we need media coverage should we get started? Like, what does the timing look like for an engagement? For that, our first answer is always, depends on what news you have. If you don't have any news, and if you want to do what we call thought leadership, and we can probably talk a little bit more about that later, if you want to write op-eds and bylines, or if you want to be quoted on certain subject matter, that's broadly out in the press, then the answer to when you want to get started is whenever you're ready. If you are retaining a public relations firm, and certainly one like FischTank, and you have a specific announcement coming up, whether maybe it's a capital raise, maybe it's a technological breakthrough or milestone, maybe it's a key partnership, notable addition to your board, whatever the piece of news is, we typically would, ideally like a 6-week head start, because that way, one takes a couple weeks to, maybe not even a couple weeks, a week to at least have a kickoff call, go over messaging. These are things we take very seriously. We have an onboarding process that I think is one of the big reasons that we're able to produce for clients. Then typically there's, putting together a press release draft and getting people to sign off on it. And, any organization like yours and mine that I work with professional services, or I work as professional services firms, it's never that easy as like, hey, here's the first version, and then they send a few changes back and then it's all good. These things can take, days, weeks, and I've actually seen months of nuancing a press release to get it along. And then we want a minimum of at least a couple weeks to shop it to journalists ahead of time or under embargo. So a normal engagement, ideally, if you've got like some things you want to release, we'd like to be engaged 6 weeks prior.
Sure.
People ask about cost. That one's tough. I can only answer for FischTank, and I suppose a number of firms which are retainer based. However, there are some firms out there that try like the pay for placement model. Respectfully, I advise against that for a number of different reasons. But retainer or the pay for play model, you can find some hourly people, some contractors too. So payment can be very flexible. That's obviously a question we get ahead of time. And then I think people want to get a better understanding of how do we collaboratively identify and approach journalists. That's a pretty big one because people will ask, and what are your expectations for results? And we like to have those discussions ahead of time. If you're raising 30, 40, 50 million dollars or anything really north of 20, and you do it, in a Series A or a seed round, you're looking at getting some meaningful coverage. TechCrunch, The Verge, VentureBeat. Those are all like very high quality media platforms, and they're going to write about something of that size. Or if you have a major technology milestone or breakthrough, that's certainly going to warrant press coverage. If the announcement is, we formed a website and plan on raising $20 million, that might get some trade pickup, but planning on raising and actually raising are two very different things. Now, there's ways to get to being written about, but you won't get a feature announcement because you're planning to do something.
Right.
And I'd like to be honest about those things, out of the gate, obviously, with clients, because I do get questions all the time, and they think like, we're going to launch an equity crowdfunding campaign and have our site up in a couple of weeks. We want New York Times to write about us, and any firm that would say yes to that is doing a disservice to their client.
Oh yeah, I mean, transparency is key, particularly in an industry such as marketing, where there's so many groups that lose those type of core values. And you're talking about these massive publishers. It's such an effective tool for creating social proof. Prospective investors, be it retail or accredited, generally don't trust what they believe online. There's generally some type of validation process that needs to occur, and being able to showcase premium media publishers, particularly the ones that are showing thought leadership to the audiences on a regular basis, can be looked at as highly valuable, to say the least, for issuer campaigns. I've seen it happen on our clients' campaigns, and particularly how often those articles are then picked up. If there's a piece that comes out in Forbes and then it's repurposed 100 different times from people linking to it on Twitter, from other publishers covering it, the traffic, the conversions, the investments that occur thereafter are much stronger. What type of responses are you seeing from different types of headlines? Meaning, you just mentioned once different milestones are reached within the campaign itself, far more likely to get covered. Are there other types of headlines that you see commonalities for? Is that by industry? Let's say you're working with multiple companies in clean energy tech. What is getting the publishers, what is getting the writers' attentions the most? Where should founders be looking to draft out their storyline?
Sure. And I want to just touch on your first point about validating how media coverage can be very validating for someone who's conducting due diligence, and that's potential customer, investor, potential partner, potential employee. We're actually getting hired more and more often by people who want some help getting visibility for recruiting purposes, which has been interesting, but is also obviously important, especially for large organizations. That point's so important because you can have a client, we can have our clients, even if they are, fairly early stage and don't have meaningful news yet, we can have them quoted in the Wall Street Journal. We can have them quoted in the New York Times, Fast Company. That happens all the time. They were quoted talking about something that they're subject matter experts for, and they deserve that coverage. Whether or not they've, go back to the last example, whether or not they've raised 20 million. They could be planning to, and they could, have their offering couldn't even launch for a few weeks from now. Wouldn't even matter. If they're providing valuable information to a journalist, that's what's going to get them quoted. We have a client in the Wall Street Journal today. He has one sentence, one quote, 9 words, and it's absolutely perfect. The story's not about him, it's about his city, and he did an awesome job on the interview. He's a qualified spokesperson, and he's quoted in an article that's now been syndicated on Fox Business, MSN. It's been all over the place. It's good. He deserves it. So there is that route. You can get media coverage without having a major milestone. I wouldn't want to discourage anyone. But yeah, your point is very well taken. When people Google, my client this morning, they're going to find the Wall Street Journal at the top of the Google News results. He knows this, so he's going to be, his team is launching some campaigns, like around digital, probably the things that you do much better than I do, right? Amplifying a piece of content. Mm-hmm. So I think all of this really flows nicely into your question of like what can generate headlines, and it's saying something that's meaningful, right? These journalists, they have 500 people like me who are like my colleagues who are in their inbox every day, no doubt about it, in their inbox every day. 300 of them are just people who are hitting blast emails and like spray and pray approach to media relations. So a tech journalist is getting a pitch about Kylie Jenner's cats or something like that. But there are 100 plus pitches that are hitting their inbox. So if 2 days after President-elect Biden is inaugurated, if 2 days later a media agency is pitching clean tech reporters and saying Joe Biden will be good for clean technology, okay, well that's not interesting. That's certainly not unique. Everybody has thought of that, right? Like, okay, let's come up with a unique approach. And I'm not trying to make this political, I'm just using an example. Sure. How will President-elect Biden's renewable energy plan impact residential energy storage? Right now you're getting specific. So by providing value, that's how you're going to be quoted in high quality stories. And that's how you're going to have headlines that really resonate with your target audience. Especially if you're doing like a Q&A or an extensive interview on a subject, whether it's about your company, your platform, your industry. The more of a position you take and put yourself out there and like speak to with conviction about your audience, your investors, your platform, your technology, whatever it may be, that's going to reflect nicely in the headline.
Yes.
Not all of the time, but often.
Yes. And you brought up relevancy. Perfect, especially for 2020, year of so many different headlines. We reformat marketing strategies, or at least update on a weekly basis for some of our clients because of how much the world can change based on what's being talked about in the media today. But going back to that point of relevancy, we're not pitching reporters. We're not on the PR side, but we'll change up our advertising messaging where our focus lies to reflect different news headlines, something the audience may be seeing that day, that week when they're scrolling through their devices. I imagine that plays a big role for the story, for the pitches that you guys are making as you're talking about here. And I think even though it may appear obvious, it's something that's often missed by the groups that we speak with, to the extent of what are other groups in the space putting out that week, that month. Let's not just talk about your product, your team, but how it fits into the larger editorial calendar, editorial schedule of some of the groups that you're pitching. Do you find that to be something that is a big component of your pitches, is reflecting current news headlines?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, I guess, sort of like 3 parts that I want to speak to about that. The first is that you have to be cognizant of what's going on in the world, right? On Apple Day, or Battery Day, on Apple Day, you don't email consumer tech journalists. You just don't do it. They're not writing about any of your clients. They're writing about Apple, right? Like the day the vaccine came out, we held back all healthcare related pitching because guess what? Or the healthcare news, because guess what healthcare journalists are writing about? They're not writing about our, early, mid, or late stage oncology therapy developer. They're going to write about Pfizer's vaccine, which they should do, right? So one is being sensitive and cognizant of that, and not, pitching a Wall Street Journal reporter who covers breaking news and saying like, hey, you want to, learn more about this company, right? It doesn't work. So one is knowing that. The second part is what we call trend jacking. Every firm has different terminology for it, and I didn't come up with it. I think my partner, one of my colleagues, did. But trend jacking is finding something in like literally today's breaking news that resonates with our clients. So Stripe's announcement from last week, very significant, right? In the fintech industry, everybody writing about it. We had pitches going out the door at 8:15 a.m. Because it was relevant to one of our fintech clients, and it generated several pieces of media coverage for them. If you wait until that evening, your chances of media coverage going down drop significantly.
Sure.
We have a few clients based in Austin, and we were pretty confident as a group that they were going to get the Tesla Gigafactory announcement. This is several months ago. We had pitches and press releases ready to go the day before. Not the day before, weeks before, so that and we also had them for I think Little Rock, Arkansas was the other finalist, just in case. So we're prepared at 7:50 in the morning. So trend jacking is very important. I mean, if your story idea comes out of nowhere and there's a bunch of breaking news about something else, you're SOL. And then the third part, which relates to the first two, is also having relationships with journalists. I mentioned spray and pray, email blasting. Reporters can see through that. They'll skewer you on Twitter. They'll try to unsubscribe. They'll blacklist your firm's URL, which is a terrible thing to happen to any media relations firm. So we do zero email blasting at FischTank. We try to have relationships with journalists in all industries, but as you can imagine, it's easier to have a relationship with a Wall Street Journal reporter than it is with the on-air personality with CNBC at night. So you have to know who you're contacting, right? You don't want the CNBC anchor. You want to have a relationship with the producer for closing bell, right? You want to have a relationship with, as I mentioned, whether it's Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Trade. And that relationship is very similar to how your client's relationship should be. It should be based on information. So our team sends journalists stuff just because they think it'll be interesting, and sometimes not even related to our clients. Something like, hey, thought of you when I saw this. What do you think? We follow them and engage with them on Twitter. We don't, or on LinkedIn. We don't try to oversell it over the top and root for their favorite football team or something like that. But it helps to develop a relationship with a reporter. And I'm fortunate. I'm sure that if other media relations people were watching this who had been around the 90s or 80s, they would probably give me grief for saying it. But the industry has changed a ton in 12 years. I still have a lot of journalist relationships that journalists from daily newspapers, online, TV, where you could go get a coffee or a beer or lunch, or sometimes even meet outside of Lower Manhattan where our office is based. Those relationships are really important, and sometimes I think that I don't ever want to make it about age and say young PR professionals, because I swore I'd never be one of those people. But I feel like right now, and take out COVID, there's just less emphasis in the PR space in developing relationships with reporters to learn about what they look for in a story, what they want to write about, what's important to their readers, what their process is for reviewing content. Once you're able to establish that relationship, it makes your job way easier. And it makes their job way easier also, because you're not feeding them bullshit, or you're not feeding them fluff the whole time.
Sure. And I was going to ask about, how important relationships are in this industry, the right way to go about them. I've always pictured a PR firm as, a team that's golfing with the Wall Street Journal every other week, or like you said, some of the dinners or happy hours. We've talked about how important it is. Talked a little bit about what that relationship looks like. So it sounds like long-term, being able to submit content that is of value to them in the fashion that they like it to be received. If you were giving, ideas of how a founder could build a relationship with a few wish list type publishers. Is that where it all starts? Is it, looking to see who the appropriate writers are, reaching out to them, not, asking, but hey, saw this, thought of you, and doing somewhat structured follow-ups and looking for a relationship to emerge from there? Is it far deeper than that? Is it usually through an introduction? So instead of somebody reaching out, being introduced by another party, I know referrals go such a long way in this industry. What do those relationships and formation of those look like between a founder, a PR group, and publishers?
Well, I think your first example is exactly how it should be. Whether it's, a PR professional, like someone from FischTank, or whether it's a CEO, or whether it's an internal, just like a internal marketing and, media outreach person. I think you start with just a very quick introduction, but in response to something, provide a little bit of value. So maybe you share some insight. I can't, hey, I saw this and thought of you, or maybe like, hey, I read this story and curious what you think about this kind of technology, or whether this will ever, whatever, or just send a quick email and say, hey, really enjoyed your story. Wanted to introduce myself. I'm X, Y, and Z. I'm the CEO of ABC. Hope we can, connect sometime down the road. Here's my website. Here's my LinkedIn.
Sure.
That's a very good starting point. I mentioned, and by the way, there's a lot of ways to do that. I have a goal where I just try to email one new journalist a week, and about something they just wrote, not about me or my clients. I would say when you do that, probably 80% of the time, they'll actually write back. Whereas like it's flipped, and most of the time when you're pitching a story, like you'd love 20% of the time getting a response. But I think it's nice, obviously, just to show that you understand their coverage area and what their audience is looking for. So like a best practice, I would say, would certainly be leaving or making, try to make one connection per week. Or I know some people, a couple of my employees are probably closer to like 5 a day somehow. But that's what they're doing all day. They love working with journalists. It's exciting, and it, makes their clients happy.
Absolutely. And, there's great quotes out there. Your network is your net worth. And I try to use these offline, online analogies about how to build relationship. And it really depicts it well, what you said there, where, I try to picture bumping into somebody at a party. And if I just throw an ask at them or talk about myself for 5 minutes, the attention is going to be it's not going to be existent. It'll be a non-starter type of communication. So if you go on, compliment something that they did, authentically, with actual points that stood out to you, and have a relationship build from there, it's only going to lead to good things over time.
Definitely. And it's something where the payoff is not always instantaneous. I know that for certain. And I mean, that's networking in general, that business development. Sometimes you meet someone and then you work with them 3 or 4 years later, even if you're not, they're not directly in your sales funnel. They're just in your network. It's the same concept. You want to grow your network, and you also, hopefully, if you're engaging with the right reporters, it's going to mean you're learning a lot more about, your industry. It should hopefully make you a little bit smarter when it comes to your audience, when it comes to your competitors, things of that nature. So I've certainly seen that the people who invest time in it, whether it's through an agency or an internal group or themselves, excuse me, they tend to be the more, certainly the more productive when it comes to getting results. By comparison, I've certainly seen people that, that if they have 2 or 3 announcements a year, they prefer to go hire, an agency or bring someone in and, spray and pray for a month and hope things work out, and might be more cost effective, but I don't think it's very productive.
Sure.
It certainly doesn't generate the results that could be gained if they had what I think is a more comprehensive and engaging journalist program in place.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about results for a second. We're generally presented with a group, let's say an equity crowdfunding, an issuer comes to us and says, hey, this is my marketing budget. Things are working. I can pull more in, but I need to be able to have some type of traction. What is the roadmap that you like to discuss to set expectations of not just that initial timeline? You'd mentioned about 6 weeks for getting set up, but if they're going to run a Reg A Plus campaign, if they're going to have 12 months live for their offering, what are the ideal milestones to go after? Is that getting covered once a month? Is there an array of different publishers, industry specific, more in the finance world, more in the entrepreneurship side of things, that you like to, really build out? Like, what would an ideal, almost like a case study afterwards, but if you were drafting it out beforehand, what would the ideal scenario be for a 12-month Reg A Plus campaign in terms of results, in terms of performance from a PR perspective?
Well, I love that you started with objectives and metrics, or metrics, because that definitely gets you to objectives. People, we could stick with the Reg A Plus example, often hire FischTank for a Reg A Plus for a combination of reasons. But one is going to be to get media coverage that validates the company, so that investors, partners, whomever doing their due diligence, are believers in the company and find it to be reputable and consider investment or promotion, whatever that may be. Two is hoping that everything aligns and it ends up driving a lot of site traffic to the website for people to invest. I would say three would be accumulating backlinks. That can be, backlinks are a investor acquisition tool. Backlinks are also, if the company is relying on Google search or online search for those using Bing, if they're relying on search results for the future of their business, then you need to start accumulating backlinks, and I think that media relations is one of the best ways of doing that. So typically when we talk to a company that's considering a Reg A Plus raise, whether it's 10, 20, or soon to be 50 million, whatever dollars, that tends to be one of those, or a combination of those three tend to be the driver. I would say in terms of duration, and by the way, so for those, the metrics are all different, right? Google Analytics is obviously a good metric. How much site traffic, was it qualified site traffic? What did they do? That's obviously one. We have some clients with very sophisticated Google Analytics funnels, conversion funnels, so they know, like, okay, this segment ran on NPR. We got 125 consultations, and we closed 10% of those, so it's worth X amount. However that works.
Sure.
I would say backlinks and domain authority is a good metric for those that certainly care about search position. And then for some, it's a little bit of a volume play. I know digital advertisers, investor acquisition folks, who they want to use media relations results as a sales or marketing or investor acquisition tool. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's out of our hands, right? Like, we produce the article in Forbes, and then the company or its investor relations team goes out and augments it. In terms of duration, again, that depends on the company. Some companies, they know, especially some in the Reg A Plus space, they already have established partnerships or are revenue producing. So they might be able to say, like, hey, we've got 5 significant milestones this year. Here's what we think the timing is. Clinical trials here, this partnership here, adding this guy to our board here, she's taking over CEO here, whatever the 5th one is, and then we can try to time those appropriately. You don't really want to stack them and go release, especially meaningful release, like week after week after week, because you can dilute your message, you can bury yourself, you can scoop yourself. Typically you want to space them out. There's no like actual formula, but I would certainly say spacing them out every 2+ weeks is a very good idea. But others, like, they have an idea that two big things are coming in the spring, one in the summer, 2 in the fall, 1 in December. So then we map our calendar out that way in terms of planning. I would definitely say that that's not enough to pay a PR firm for an entire year, right? So thought leadership and contributed content becomes really important and effective. You know, we've done positioning around whether it's, you know, breaking political news or breaking science news, or maybe it's something that's just much more unique to a company that's raising capital. So maybe they've got like a unique approach to cultivating cannabis in Northern California, right? And they're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. They're in this many dispensaries. There's going to be a ton of things to talk about with the press, and that mainstream reporters are going to care about efficacy and dosage. What are the trends? How are people buying it? How are they smoking it? You can, you know, that's what an onboarding session for FischTank and a new client looks like, is what are all the things that you can and will talk about? Mm-hmm. And once we know that, then we can put together thought leadership campaigns before and following all of our key announcements.
Sure.
I don't know if that was the overload of information. It felt like it.
Not at all. In fact, it was thorough, and I have 10 more questions, and I'm going to limit to one just on that topic. And just speaking of results a little bit further, you know, on the advertising side, we have to break everything down by algorithms. And I really believe it all goes hand in hand. And I want to touch on that a little bit too, and all the different channels to collaborate. As you mentioned with advertising, you get a win. Now we could show those logos as social proof. We could do a boosted post. We could do all types of things to get more traffic around that piece of content. But just out of curiosity, are there any ranges that you point to for how much traffic, how many, you know, inquiries, how many investments, anything like that could occur from you know, a press win? This could reference, you know, an example. So not something that, hey, you get this picked up, but just, you know, in this one occasion, we got it picked up, and here's what followed. Are there any type of numbers that the audience could associate with some of this coverage?
Yeah, definitely. How about I give you some of the good with the bad?
Yes.
So 3 or 4 years ago, we were working with a startup biotech company, and they had a very cool technology. And we were very fortunate that we had a Fast Company reporter who was interested and did a very in-depth piece when we were, you know, announcing our launch. The story ended up, you know, the next day there was a ton of interest. We ended up working with the not Wall Street Journal, with USA Today on a piece which was very like consumer, obviously is a more consumer focused outlet. After that, it just went viral, and someone actually wrote a $500,000 ticket and invested in the company. That is like awesome, high watermark. Mm-hmm. For like a piece of news in a single investment. We've also had just sustained campaigns where we had a really good corporate communications program lined up, and this company had down to a science whatever percent of people that came to their website and landed on their investor page. That's how much they were going to convert. So they know this is about driving site traffic. We came up with a really creative survey. We had several new personnel announcements, including an NBA superstar joining the board, or former NBA superstar joining the board. And, over a period of time, we just drove steady, qualified site traffic, and they were getting investments out of it. And we've been working with them now 10 months later. I think that just shows you what like a very consistent, stable PR program is. They know that they pay us this amount a month. On average, we've been generating, probably for that client 4, 5, 6 media opportunities per month. And it's driving 1,200 people and a certain port, whatever, right? So that there's that. Then I'll share a story from 2016. We were working with a prominent and now bankrupt company that was doing an equity crowdfunding campaign. I believe they were doing a testing the waters, taking allocations of interest. Mm-hmm. And we launched the offering, and the company was well known. And it went gangbusters, man. Absolutely gangbusters in terms of media coverage. National television that night, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, New York Post, New York Daily News. Geez, there we go. USA Today wrote about it. I could go on. And they had, I think, like in 24 hours, 1 point something million dollars in, I guess, allocations of interest. The back end of their site, which we don't handle, they somehow screwed up their information capture, and they lost every single email address. I know you're a digital guy, so I mean, that company's bankrupt for a reason. Maybe it would have happened. Maybe it would have happened anyway. Maybe the raise wouldn't have been. I can give you the specifics off the record, but
Sure.
Total failure. Like that's when if you're not ready to set it's like a mousetrap, right? Everything sort of needs to fire at the same time, or none of it works.
Yeah.
So I've seen the awesome. I've seen the consistent and steady, and then I've seen just some programs that go sideways. Maybe we had one client who had a really cool event coming up, tons of media coverage planned. They canceled the event the week prior because they were having an internal financial issue. And in a situation like that, FischTank has egg on their face because we have to email a bunch of journalists that were planning on attending an event, including some traveling, that it wasn't going to happen. So it really is a mixed bag. And hopefully there's no one in my shoes that sits around talking about how every campaign is successful, because there's just so many moving parts. And when it comes to equity crowdfunding, it's just critical that everybody does their job.
100%. And it's amazing how many different variables there are here. I look at the success rates of startups, the success rates of digital fundraising as a whole, not just to hit a minimum goal, but to hit the actual, hard cap or, full milestone that they're going after, the full raise. And it's not great. And because of all these different elements, I'll get asked, hey, is my campaign going to work in a, discovery meeting? And I say very clearly that if I were to determine at that stage which clients were going to make it, which ones weren't, I would have been wrong in many situations. Some of the campaigns I thought were going to do the best performed marginally, or like you said, went gangbusters at first, and then later on, some things further on down their funnel just didn't pan out. In other cases, campaigns that I thought would do okay performed outstanding levels in comparison to industry averages. So it's so tough to really pinpoint what it's going to be. We try to let the analytics tell us what's working, what's not working. The whole concept of the show is our whole philosophy towards marketing as a whole. Want to talk about that funnel a bit more. Want to talk about email capture, other things to go alongside PR. So if you get a publisher to pick up an article, what marketing steps follow that you've seen, as a trend to see the maximum result from that coverage? Does this include email marketing and featuring it to the existing audience, social media platforms, using it in ads, sharing with strategic partners, sharing with cold outreach on LinkedIn or other types of direct outreach that's happening? What other elements do you recommend to your clients, or just as a whole, to include alongside their PR strategy?
Yeah, I love that question. You're right, because you can't. Something just doesn't pop up on the internet and then everyone goes and makes a decision. I certainly think having a strong digital team in place that can, whether they sponsor, maybe they share the post and then boost it. Say an offering goes live and you get some coverage from Forbes, and the company page shares that, and then it gets boosted, right? Like, you're driving people to something that validates that company to them. So hopefully the goal is they return and they make an investment. I think a good, digital investor acquisition team, obviously is very effective and has experience doing that, as you do. Mm-hmm. I think that being able to leverage them in email marketing, it makes sense if the list is good, right? How many stories have you heard about someone buying a list, right? Or having, 700,000 double opt-in leads, and then like you send the email blast and the email platform like pauses it because your bounce rate is like 20%, or something bonkers like that. It happens all the time. So Is email marketing good? Is email marketing good? Of course, if the list is good. If the list is shit, then don't do it. You're just going to mess up your URL. So I certainly think email marketing is good, especially if you have a good, a strong network. So if the people who are on the email list are people who, trust you or familiar with you. So like at FischTank, if you email us, and now you will get our email, you will get our email blasts, right? When we segment by, potential clients, which we call hopefuls, and then our master list, which is just, we just call them, friends, right? So we have an idea of who to try to sell and who not to sell. I love LinkedIn. I'm a sucker for it. I think that when a company is in the news, I think its leadership needs to share that on social media, because that's consistent with your brand. If you're putting a press release out about your offering and then talking to Forbes, we'll stick with that example, then why would you not post that to your social media page? I don't think it needs to be salesy or over the top. Something humble and appreciative of the coverage, but also confident in, your company or technology or solution or whatever it is, to move the business along. I think that's all very validating. Those are some big pieces.
Absolutely. And I ask because, we're stand for effective campaigns in the industry. We want to see, founders, issuers as a whole with higher, effective rates. So any recommendations we could put out there, we see that it's generally 7 touch points or more before a conversion occurs. And strong social proof from a premium publisher can be one of the most, if not the most effective tools. But having the whole investor journey, that whole process of when they're first presented with a brand, when they go from awareness stages to consideration to intent, the conversion rate from people who intend to invest and finally do, it's not a great rate at any stage. So if we're putting valuable content out there throughout the process, it's just that much more likely that conversion event is going to occur. And, wanted to, as we're coming up on the hour here, wanted to wrap with a couple different questions. You've given a lot of, expert ideas here on what to test out in terms of getting your PR strategy started. But what do you do when things aren't working? What do you do when you're 6 weeks in, 8 weeks in, 12 weeks in, you're not getting the wins that you were looking for? What should a founder be thinking about, be whiteboarding at that point? What should they be optimizing to manage this to a point of effectiveness?
Two things, or not two things, there's probably a million things, but 2 things that would stand out to me right away. One, think outside of the box. So, I'm not saying that the reason that, hypothetical reason that someone would get coverage is because they only want to talk about themselves, but find a way to produce some meaningful content. We love using surveys to generate media coverage for our clients. If the survey is done by a third-party administrator, not by the company itself, we use SurveyMonkey, and we'll poll 1,500 people living in the state of New Jersey about some subject, and then boom, we have, the headline, 73% of people from New Jersey would never eat pizza in New York. And I'm making it up, obviously, but then BuzzFeed writes a feature with that headline, but we obviously focus on non-consumery topics, but that's a way to think outside the box and create some news, create something that's meaningful that people want to click on. Surveying is certainly a good example of that. Some clients will create really well done infographics based on their proprietary data, and then that enables them to share client case studies. I mean, if our client has a partnership that's working, or something that is worth touting, put that out there. And then the other thing I would say is just to diversify your voice. If you're not getting coverage because you get on the phone with a journalist and tell them, Joe Biden is good for green technology, congratulations, my 13-month-old knows that. You want to be able to get specific, be contrarian. I'm not saying ambulance chase or say something crazy just to get headlines, but say something that's meaningful, or new observation that you have in your space. Try to share that, or direct your PR team, whatever it may be, with journalists. Tip them off to something. Be like, this is a big deal and it's coming 6 months from now. You know, those tips will work. And just like both of those ideas have a common denominator: providing value to a journalist and to their audience. So they, back to where we started, I guess, which is appropriate. That should always be at the crux of a media relations campaign.
Absolutely.
Providing value.
I was told early on, business is the monetization of value. And whether that monetization factor is there or not, whether it's even transactional, in the format, in the dynamics or not, that's always resonated with me, is what value am I providing to the other side of this conversation? How am I conditioning it for more chats to follow? So I think all of that, speaks miles. And, let's say the founder optimizes, it's now working, taking a contrarian headline narrative or just something that adds original thought to current events. It starts resonating, your 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks from that point, and it's working. Meanwhile, the client's at $5 million of their $20 million round. How do you ramp it up? How do you scale? With advertising, we could 2x the budget every 3 to 7 days. And even when it gets to higher points, expand on the percentages. What is the art? What is the science of scaling for PR?
I think it's just adding creative campaigns and creative elements, like some of the ones that we just discussed. Certainly, when you generate your own news or generate news in general, something that's meaningful for journalists, it can also require being a little bit more frequent in your corporate communications. So maybe you want to ramp up your press release, your company announcement making activity to more of a every other week basis, just so you can they serve as more frequent touch points for journalist intake and I guess investor review. I think every answer would depend differently on the company, right? Like if you if you decided to, like, let's say, take that survey idea, right? Like, let's say media relations is working with you and you want to ramp it up a bit, maybe run that survey every single month, and then you can start seeing like what the change in sentiment is around, pizzas in New York and New Jersey, or, whatever the right terminology is. Now, some media outlets, obviously, or some companies don't have like sexy material enough to do that, right? Like if you're talking about, biotech products or oncology therapies, which I referenced before, you can't do something as, outside the box in that format. We did a campaign for a client a couple of years ago about whether patients would be open to sharing their data if they knew it would be used in an artificial intelligence and machine learning platform, if they knew that it was being used to treat cancer. That data became something that a number of journalists wrote about. So you just have to be creative and think outside the box. The goal of ramping up media relations, it's just going to require more time, probably some more contributions from the company itself, or resources, investing more in your PR firm and adding new team members or hours, or just elevating the program.
Sure. More narratives, elevating everything across the board. And I've got a list of notes here. I'm going to be sharing this with my team, with some clients. So much to take from this episode. Any parting thoughts, any actionable insights that you want to leave the audience with?
I think that, and people are going to hate hearing about this because it's so 10 years ago, but I think that that getting into the practice of blogging for a company does two things. One, it does the obvious: content, SEO, blah, 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 right? Like all of the things that can be optimized that like a professional like you can use and leverage over various digital vehicles. But two, it's about story ideation. A lot of our clients that sit down and think for sometimes half hour, just do a brain dump, a voice recording. We have one client who sends us 10-minute voice recordings, and then we turn them into a byline or into a campaign, whatever it may be. he just he rides to work listening to NPR. And if he hears something that's of interest to him, he talks about it. Now, he's got a real estate and a private equity play and a healthcare play. It's, very diverse client, the parent company. But I think that's a great example of someone who, he understands that his thoughts are ammunition for us. So he'll record himself talking about whatever it is for 8 minutes on the way to work, sends it to us, and then sometimes, then he's on CNBC that night talking about it. That happened one time. But that's typically how it works. If you put the time into thinking about your industry and what's important and what's interesting, results will come.
Beautiful
Cool.
recommendations. I can back that. Everyone should be writing that down right now. So many different uses for blogs. I like how simple you made it sound, of record yourself, transcribe it, tap into the voice and statements and create articles from there. So many different vehicles to distribute from that point too. So Eric, can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking PR with us today. If any listeners want to get in contact with you, continue the conversation, what's your preferred method of chat?
Yeah, and Jason, thank you so much for having me on. And again, the patience with scheduling, I really do appreciate, because this is fun, and I'm always amazed by how quick the time flies. If you go to FischTankPR.com, FischTankPR.com, that's a great way. Fortunately, there's not a lot of Fischgrunds out there, so you can find me on LinkedIn relatively easily. My email is eric@FischTankPR.com. So it's all pretty on brand.
Awesome.
Cool.
Again, envious of the name. My last name, Fishman. You created FischTank. Such a great use of words there. No wonder you're getting such a strong response in communications as a whole. And Eric, thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you so much again, Jason, and appreciate you setting it up. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye.